Greetings, this is Griff Ruby with part 4 of my series, Foundation's Progress, the history of Dr. Asimov's writing the Foundation series. And it begins where we left off. The first installment had hit the newsstands on April 10, 1942, the May issue of Astounding. So now we pick up. There had been no mention of Foundation in the In Times to Come announcements of what is to expect from a future issue. The story did not gain the cover, and indeed was not even mentioned on the cover, nor did Asimov's name appear there. Only on the table of contents page did it list Foundation, together with a short blurb which reads, 100,000 men and women, scientists they believed themselves, worked on a project. The project they thought they worked on was a fraud, the one they had really been assigned to And on the lead page of the story, another blurb merely states, it is a characteristic of a decadent civilization that their scientists consider all knowledge already known, that they spend their time making cyclopedic gatherings of that knowledge. But that foundation was something rather tricky. And drawings by M. Isaac, whoever that is. But the sequel to follow received much more attention. Since the first part ended on a cliffhanger, the In Time to Come column announced that for the June issue, if Asimov's little puzzle in Foundation is not obvious to you, the elements necessary for the solution are all there, you'll be doubly interested in Bridle and Saddle coming next issue. It's a sequel to Foundation and the second of a series that looks to me as though it had nice possibilities. There are really two stages in a culture that produce eras of romantic adventure, when it is collapsing and when, Renaissance, it is coming out as eclipse into a new form. Asimov has in mind a series that will follow the collapse of the empire and watch the tides of the new barbarism trying to tear down the foundation. Animals of a species don't like and try to destroy other individuals of the species which are different. Cultures, even collapsing barbaric cultures, tend to hate and want to destroy the different and higher cultures near them if they can. Bridle and Saddle is a nice answer to a stiff problem. The June 1942 issue of Astounding, appearing at the newsstands on May 15, featured the 17,419-word story Bridle and Saddle by Isaac Asimov on the cover, along with the table of contents blurb, given a foundation with wealth, strategic position, and no arms in a warring region of space. To protect it, and the lead story page blurb, given a foundation with much knowledge, much skill, and no military resources, and a whole series of plotting ambitious planets to attack it. How can the few, the weak, but the wise, men of the Foundation rule as they must, if they would not die? And drawings by Schneemann. The analytics for Foundation, reported in July, showed that it placed fourth with a score of 3.21, an inauspicious start for so great a classic. Bridle and Saddle placed first with a score of 1.55. Asimov was not to begin another Foundation story until 1943. A little note on these scores. They seem to be based on the readership writing in ratings of the stories within a given issue. The best would be number 1, second best 2, 3, 4, down to however many stories an issue has. And so to get a rating for an issue, you just average. What did everybody say for story this? And you average, well, this guy thought it was number 3, and this one thought it was number 4, and that one thought it was number 2, and so on. You average it all out. I think that's where these numbers come from. At least that seems to make a little sense. So a lower number is a good thing. A higher number means it's not doing as well. So 3.21 means it was probably not even quite the third best story to a lot of people. 1.55, that's much better. Okay. Anyway, Asimov would not begin another Foundation story until 1943, on which he writes in Memory at Green, page 389, on July 26, I visited Campbell. I couldn't very well be in New York on a Monday and not visit him. I had a third Foundation story in mind, what I planned to call The Big and the Little. It was to deal with the manner in which the Foundation extended its grip on neighboring regions of space by making use of trade, selling little gimcracks that the large kingdoms found after a while they could not do without, so that they passed into economic servitude. So, he actually began to write The Big and the Little on October 11, having worked on a couple robot stories in the meantime. In Memory at Green, page 396, he reports his writing and selling of The Big and the Little buzz. The Big and the Little was going along slowly, but very well, and very wordily too. By the time I was done on January 17, it had turned out to be 22,500 words long, the longest story I had ever written. I mailed it to Campbell the next day, and on January 26 received a check for no less than $400, not only 0.015 cents a word, but an additional 0.0025 a word as bonus. It was an unbelievable check, more than twice as large as any other I had gotten from my writing. That one check equaled 1.5 months of my Navy Yard income, though of course the story had taken 1.5 months to write. During his service in the war, his writing had slowed considerably as he wrote only a few tales and sold them all to Astounding Science Fiction, of which he writes in pages 442 and 443 of the early Asimov. I was definitely back at writing. Output was low, but during the remaining war years, I wrote 2 Positonic robot stories, Catch That Rabbit and Paradoxical Escape, which appeared in February 1944 and August 1945 issues of Astounding, respectively. Both were eventually included in I, Robot. The latter story appears in I, Robot under the title of Escape. The word paradoxical had been added by Campbell in one of his few title changes, and I didn't like it. I also wrote no less than 4 stories of the Foundation series during those same years. These were The Big and the Little, The Wedge, Dead Hand, and The Mule. All appeared in Astounding, of course, the first 3 in the August 1944, October 1944, and April 1945 issues, respectively. So, by now, the market for Foundation stories was fully established, and the time had come that requests for new stories within it began to come along, as given in Memory at Green, page 399. On February 3, 1944, I received a letter from Campbell that rather plaintively asked for stories, especially additional Foundation stories. How our rules had changed. He particularly suggested a short story dealing with the traders whom I had introduced in The Big and the Little. I therefore spent the first half of 1944 writing The Wedge and Dead Hand, the 4th and 5th stories of the Foundation series. The former was the short story that Campbell had requested. It was only 7,000 words long and was the shortest of the series. The latter was 25,000 words and was the longest so far. Both stories were accepted promptly. The Wedge was taken on April 11, 1944 for $122.50, and Dead Hand on August 26, 1944 for $437.50, a new high in payment for a single story. In the context of the traders as introduced in The Big and the Little, The Wedge, as originally written, introduced Lathan Devers, a trader who would go on to figure in a large way in Dead Hand. The name kind of has a sound to it. As the story began, Lathan Devers was completely a lather. This continued in the use of characters who carry on from one installment to another. Salvor Hardin in the first 2 installments written, the father-son combination of Onum and Dusum Bar, and of course Harry Seldon and his plan. The Wedge appears to have been a rather quick and effortless piece, and one which he uses to showcase what a brilliant and clever protagonist Lathan Devers is, as worthy as anyone could be in the role of taking on the Empire, though he may have already had in mind how unveiling Lathan Devers' cleverness would be in the defeat of the Empire. But as he begins Dead Hand, he begins to weary of the series, as seen in page 404 of In Memory at Green. Then, on August 21, I visited Campbell and handed in Dead Hand, the 5th Foundation story, for which the record check arrived on the 26th. Meanwhile, the 4th Foundation story, The Wedge, had appeared in the October 1944 Astounding. To tell the truth, though, I was tiring of the Foundation series. I had written 3 Foundation stories in a row, and for 9 months those 3 stories had been constantly on my mind. I wanted a rest, and I also wanted a chance to make use of the other writing I was doing, the Navy style, which, unless I exercised it somehow, might well corrode my vitals. So, Dead Hand would also occasion one reliance upon Arnold Toynbee as his historical source, as he writes on page 401 of In Memory at Green. In the spring of 1944, Sprague lent me his 6-volume Study of History by Arnold Toynbee, one volume at a time. After the war, Toynbee went through a period of great, though temporary, popularity. Sprague, however, was an admirer long before the rest of the world caught on. I came to be an admirer too, temporarily. There are some people who, on reading my Foundation series, are sure that it was influenced basically by Toynbee. They are only partly right. The first 4 stories were written before I had read Toynbee. Dead Hand, however, was indeed influenced by it. Afterward, however, as I continued to read Toynbee, my admiration waned. More and more, it was obvious to me that he was essentially a classical and Christian scholar, and that the order he found in history was an imposed one produced by his seeing reflections of classical history wherever he looked. The final stories of the Foundation series were once more relatively free of his influence, therefore. What really influenced the Foundation series was, as I said before, Gibbon's Decline of the Fall of the Roman Empire, which I had read and admired as a 17-year-old, which I have never ceased to admire. Another influence was the Historian's History of the World, a 1907 vintage 24-volume collection of historical writings so arranged as to give a chronological account of events nation by nation. It made for jumpy reading, but I loved it, and during the latter half of 1943, I picked it out volume by volume from the Philadelphia Free Library, reading it both at work and at home. Meanwhile, the next 2 Foundation installments were finally seeing print for the first time. On July 18, 1944, the August issue came out with the 20,787-word story, The Big and the Little, as the cover story. The previous month, In Time to Come, announced the story thus. Isaac Asimov, as has been mentioned here before, is fairly busy on more vital duties than spinning yarns of the far future. He's trying to help assure a more immediate future, but he does get some free time. Somewhere he found enough to do another Foundation story, which, judging by requests received, should be pleasant news. This one is titled The Big and the Little, and concerns the battle between atomic generators. Generators on one side that towered 6 stories high, could throw a defensive screen around the planet, move an asteroid, or incinerate a world. On the other side, the generators were, for lack of necessary raw material and resources, walnut-sized things, devices that could throw a defensive screen around one man, move an automobile, or make a kitchen paring knife of atomic force. The battle between the giants and the midgets could only have one final conclusion, as you'll realize after you've read the yarn. Since the format for that magazine had changed from the bedsheet format to a digest size, the table of contents would no longer contain introductory blurbs. There were still the page blurbs for which this installment read, The Empire was dying, but even a dying colossus is a terrible enemy. The Foundation was little and had only little things. Kitchen knives of atomic flame against the stupendous ancient generators of the Empire. Only a couple of months later, the 6,441 story The Wedge was released in the October issue on the newsstand September 22. There was no announcement of it in Time to Come, and being less important, it did not get the cover. Its page blurb read, Gold's funny stuff, perfectly useless so far as practical work goes, but the men of the Foundation could make it do things in the psychological political field. Analytics for The Big and the Little put it in second place with a score of 2.30, and for The Wedge put it in 5th place with a score of 4.33. Asimov turned in his story, Dead Hand, on August 21, 1944, having decided he wanted to take a break by writing other non-Foundation stories. One being set in the Foundation universe, albeit while the First Empire was still very much thriving, the general time period as would be covered in his future books, Pebble in the Sky, Stars Like Dust, and The Currents of Space, and even involving an alien species, namely Blind Alley, and a robot story, Escape, which John W. Campbell had retitled Paradoxical Escape, a change Asimov chafed against. In January of 1945, however, it was time to begin his next Foundation story. He describes the creative sessions over it with Mr. Campbell's thoughts. Well, we will pick that up in the next installment.